Hello and welcome to another episode of the WealthStyle Podcast. My name is Iván Watanabe here with my partner, Evan Wohl. Evan, good morning, man. How are you?
Doing great. There's snow on the ground, but things are good.
Yeah, did you have a lot of fun with the kids out there in the snow?
Yeah, there's still a snowman out there, a little tiny one, but still hanging in there.
It's supposed to be like 50 degrees on Friday, so it might not be there for long.
Yeah, we got a picture.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're excited to have on a good friend of the firm, Maria Garceffa, a psychotherapist, to come on and share some conversations that we've been having recently about perhaps some difficult conversations to have with family members during the holidays and some important ones. So really trying to work on some language and just the best approach to have some challenging conversations. So Maria, welcome to the podcast. Appreciate you coming on. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm doing well. I'm in the mode of difficult conversations because we are approaching the holidays.
Yeah, for sure. Well, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself, and then we'll kind of dive into the conversation.
Sure. Well, I've been a psychotherapist in practice since 2010. I worked across Brooklyn, across the Bronx. I opened a private practice in 2022, and now I see adults and couples in New York and Connecticut. My clients used to come into me. I used to go into them, even in their homes. And now we have a lot more availability to see each other on telehealth.
Well, thanks for joining. Evan and I were talking recently about this. And just in general, we find during the holidays, towards the end of the year, people are trying to wrap up their financial plans, their estate plans. They're trying to wrap up the year. They're thinking about their goals for the future. And a common sort of conversation or sort of topic that pops up in households, and clients are asking us for best practices on how to approach their family members, typically older family members, on how to have the challenging conversation of what their wishes are when they are no longer here. And, we're not licensed psychotherapists. And so we really wanted to have an expert on to help us with the language so that we can give our clients and our network the information that they need to have these conversations in an effective manner, right? Because as you can imagine, it's a hot topic. Feelings are high, emotions are high. And so, we could really use your assistance on that. So, I thought we would kind of talk a little bit about that today.
And maybe if I could add or expand that a little bit, it's not just that topic, although certainly important, but a lot of our clients will have conversations about, will they need to take care of their parents as they age, whether that means because they need long-term care services or just from a financial standpoint, maybe they live longer than expected and whatever. And so it's helpful for the younger generation to know what kind of planning the older generation has put in place. And a lot of time it seems to be in the American culture that shouldn't talk about finances and money. But it's certainly helpful to have a good understanding of where things stand and what we might need to expect, as that should be built into the plan. So anyway, anywhere along those lines would be certainly helpful to, I think, a lot of people.
Sure. Yeah, this is really very much my jam. Having the difficult conversations, especially when there's multi-generational involvement. Some of my clients are in their 70s and have a lot of feelings about what their children are doing or saying or asking. Many more of my clients are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they're incredibly stressed out about the lack of communication with their 80-year-old parents. So if something feels taboo and feels like we shouldn't discuss it, like end-of-life care, death, inheritances, if that feels taboo, whatever feels like you shouldn't talk about it, that's exactly where you should begin. It's not about should you, and it's about how. One of the most important things is knowing your audience. So I'm going to refer to the three of us as that meat in the sandwich generation. The parents in this case are 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe beyond. Knowing how to go about it means understanding your audience and understanding the messenger, because you might be so well versed. Perhaps you have gone out and done your own estate planning and you've had a great experience and you know exactly where to send your parents or your aunt. That doesn't mean they're ready to hear that information. If they are ready, that doesn't mean they want to hear it from you. So arming yourself with information is important, but planning how to deliver it matters. I could go on, but do you have a question in there?
No, I mean, I think that's a great place to start, right? So you're identifying that there's a need to have a conversation, right? And we're nervous about having this conversation. Like, I think the situation and the circumstances and planning, like, the room that you're going to have this conversation. I mean, like the detail, whatever details you're able to control actually matter in the execution of how successful the conversation is. And that's something that I got from our call before this. So, you know, can we start there? Like very simply, you know, what would the recommendations be around how to approach the conversation before the conversation and you know, those sorts of things. So I'll kind of, you know, I'll let you take it off from there. There's an introduction,
and there's a preface, and then there's a whole novel. You want to start with whoever's in that sandwich generation. If you're an only child, the whole burden is on you. But then that also means you don't need to collaborate. In the situation where there are more adult children that need to get on the same page, that has to happen before you go to your parents. So before anyone brings it up, hey mom, hey dad, you really want as many of those children to be as close to the same page as possible. You're looking for consensus, not complete agreement, because how many people can say that, yes, I fully agree with all of my siblings all of the time? Consensus is important so that then if the middle of that sandwich generation is on the same page, now you can jointly go to your parents. You want to start by planting seeds. You don't want to approach and say, I've done work and I have a plan I'd like to present to you. You want to go more casually in a quieter moment, not in the middle of a hustle bustle, not 2 days before Christmas if you're celebrating, not the morning of New Year's Day if everyone's cleaning up from the night before. A quiet moment when people are not stressed out. And drop the initial invitation. I've been thinking, we've been thinking, we'd love to have a conversation with you about, and this is where you have to know your audience. What is it that your parents are motivated around? If it's much more around their health, then go there. If it's more about finances, go there. You'll end up in the same place, but you have to know the in. If they're concerned about their health, that's the doorway you enter into so that then you can circle around to how it's all part of the same package of your financial planning.
Yep.
What are they motivated by? And in those earlier conversations among the adult siblings, who's the best messenger? I cannot stress this enough. The best messenger is the one where you all have this historical data. Who do the parents listen to? It doesn't have to be the person with the most financial acumen. It has to be the person who has the track record of ease of communication with your parents.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, all that makes sense. You know, it's funny because I think people oftentimes don't consider that the objective here is to have the message received and then action taken. So they do whatever's most comfortable for them. Hey, listen, I did my financial plan. You know, you should have a financial plan, and it's about the numbers, but it might not motivate the family member the way that you're thinking about it, right? And so, you know, oftentimes the response could be, if they're not motivated by the money, it could just be like, well, why are we having this conversation? It's just a money grab, right? But if they're more motivated to, you know, consider, hey, you know, you saw healthcare risks and what that costs mom and dad. We want to be having a conversation about this because, you know, we think you're going to be here for a long time. But again, we need to plan kind of accordingly, or pivoting to the grandkids. Listen, we really want to make sure that, you know, our kids are seeing you in the best light as you know, when you're no longer here. Right. So I think sending it with the purpose of getting them or finding out what's motivating to them and not necessarily to the messenger is super
Yes.
important. I mean, that makes a ton of sense to me.
And you might have to do a little bit of digging. So since I deal with a wide range of families and family compositions, it's very obvious to me, but let's think it through all the way for everybody. Some families will end up being motivated by who they don't want involved in healthcare situations, who they don't want involved as part of their estate and inheritance. It's much less pleasant to talk about, but if that is what the parents are motivated by, it's important to start there.
So
And
setting the right context. And would you say, I'm sure every situation is different, but would you say you might want to mention ahead of time, hey, we'd love to have a conversation with you about XYZ? Or do you think wait till you're in the moment and there's a quiet moment? Because I feel like sometimes if you say, I want to have a conversation with you about XYZ, then they start, creating stories in their mind about why or what this conversation is going to be like.
It really depends on your family. When you think about your parents, are they the ones who really want to think ahead of time and not feel ambushed? They're going to need 2 or 3 weeks lead up. That's because you've thought carefully about who are your parents. The other folks, you might have known them now for 40, 50 years, and you know your parents are going to stew in anxiety if you drop the seeds. And they do need that quiet moment to go take advantage of their availability that particular Saturday. It's happening over breakfast and roll with it. The pre-planning is on us, is on these adult children. What is it that our parents need to hear, and how can we do that?
That makes a lot. And it's funny. Typically, when I'm talking to folks that are younger, they're doing their estate plan and talking about who's going to be the guardian of their children, that sort of conversation. I always make the joke, have the conversation over a bottle of wine. You don't want to have the conversation in front of the attorney. We want to be going in with a plan before you meet with the attorney. And when you and I were chatting previously, you said, hey, you need to make sure that you're sober for this conversation, right? And all parties need to be sober for this conversation. And I didn't realize that I was recommending the exact opposite previous to that. But that made a lot of sense as you said. Everybody needs to be at like their top faculties for this conversation, so emotions aren't running overboard, right?
Exactly. Because this is meant to be an intentional conversation, and loose lips because you've had a sip. I don't usually see that working out in everyone's best interest. Now, you and I see some different folks because people specifically seek me out to start therapy or to squeeze in an extra session when something's gone terribly wrong. So I understand that you might have better luck having a conversation over wine, but I see it frequently having gone poorly.
Listen, I think it makes more sense to have everybody be, completely sober with pure intentions as they're having the conversation. Again, just stakes seem to be very, very high, right? So going into it, so if I hear you correctly, you sort of you're doing pre-planning, right? Siblings, whoever else is going to make the approach. We figure out, what's the best angle to help them move forward, whether it's grandchildren or kids or finances or, longevity or health or whatever's going to get them motivated, who's going to be the appropriate messenger amongst that generation. And then if you think that the recipient of this conversation would be better off scheduling something for the future than having a conversation saying, hey, we'd love to kind of talk to you a little bit more about this. Can we schedule some time in the next couple of weeks? And if you think that they're going to be the type that really stews over this, perhaps scheduling something for a lot shorter of a time frame. Is that how you would position it?
Yep. So giving options is really important. You don't want to be prescriptive because parents can already feel themselves losing some of the power. I think that most people recognize the way they move within the world changes when you're 70 compared to when you're 40. And so they don't They don't want their adult children to come in with, you should this, let's do that. In these conversations with your parents, you want it to be an invitation, ideally an invitation with options. If you make this suggestion and say, I actually am around later on this afternoon if you wanted to talk, or maybe in the next 2 weeks, what do you think about it? Ending with an open-ended question, and then you pause and you hold the silence. Don't fill it in.
So let's say we started the conversation and it's going sideways. Somebody is getting agitated. Someone is getting defensive, or too many people are getting defensive. What should we do? Should we take a break and like revisit another time? Is there some special language we can use? How do we handle that?
Okay, I'm so sorry for smiling. It's just that's so my jam. When conversations go sideways, honestly.
Call Maria.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's where you want to pause and go straight with a 2-word sentence with a hard period at the end. I'm sorry. Not, I'm sorry, but I was just trying to blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry. And hold the silence. Again, most people are not loving silence unless you're in my fields, but a beat, 2-3 seconds, it matters. It shows that you're not trying to rush through someone's thought process or control the conversation. So you've paused, you said, I'm sorry. You're trying to look at all of their body language to see how are they responding to this? What felt especially prickly? And you can back up and say, I didn't mean for this to land that way. We could come back to it another time, or honestly, you could let me know when you're ready. That's what you say in the moment. It doesn't mean you drop it forever, because you might know your parents are avoiders. Many are, not all. Making someone feel ambushed is not going to invite them to collaborate and go through lawyerly processes of planning. That might be the flag that you've chosen the wrong messenger. You want to go back to the child subunit, the meat in the sandwich, and debrief and figure out what's gone sideways, what went wrong. If you're noticing that you picked the wrong door, maybe you thought, well, my parents' health is only medium. Let's go in from health. I bet that's what they're going to be motivated to discuss. You might have picked wrong, and that's okay. It means you had a misstep. You regroup. Kids come up with a new plan, possibly with a new messenger. Let me get some words that you really want to steer away from.
Please.
Yes. Okay. Should, or even worse, you should. Just, at least. Should is very prescriptive. Just makes something sound very easy. Just call the lawyer. Well, that sounds huge to many people. Just let me do the thing. That sounds like you're taking over. At least is very invalidating. At least your kids want to talk to you about planning. It puts all of those phrases put people on their toes and on the defensive. And what we're trying to do here is have an invitation where people feel welcome and safe.
I think that safety is exactly what we're trying to create, right? Just a place for people to have a conversation, very difficult, potentially difficult conversation, with their guard down as much as possible. And, I try to put myself in the position of somebody in that age group, and you're not as physically strong, and the world, as you said, looks at you differently than a 40-year-old. And so you probably start to lose some level of control.
Yeah.
And your kids start to pick up some of that, perhaps control, right? I'm just thinking about the dialogue that I have with my mom and my dad. And, what are the things that they kind of lean on me? And then what are the things that I just sort of enforce upon them, right? And they probably still view me as their, 5-year-old kid, So I'm sure it's a very interesting dynamic as an aging parent.
And every
Which
family
again is why
has
we're
every family has that experience of, you know, if we're talking about our parents, they saw their parents get older, and I think that can often be a good transition to say, you know, we saw what happened with grandma and grandpa, you know, should we have a conversation about to make sure that you guys are better situated than, you know, what previously transpired.
Absolutely.
You know, and I also find that like our generation and younger, it's not, I don't necessarily want to call it disrespect, but I think the level of reverence towards older folks is different than it used to be, right? Like in society, you know, the older folks used to be held with such regard. You'd want to seek them out for their advice. And it's kind of like, specifically with technology, I find that we kind of joke at some of the older demographics not being able to use technology in the same way. And that's kind of been, you know, the goalpost on how, I don't know, how strong somebody might be. Right. You know, can they use technology? What, you know, can they turn their computer on? Can they not? And it just sort of become a running joke and is kind of stacked over time. So the loss of control around that is just another added piece, I think, to older folks feeling a little bit less control and maybe potentially getting bossed around by younger generations. I mean, that's the kind of sense that I get. Maybe I'm off on that, but
I'm sure if you start to sense that your memory is not quite where it used to be, it's got to be a scary situation, you know? Just
So Maria, we've
40 compared to 20. All right. I can only imagine what this will be like, my reality 30 years from now.
Yeah.
That's a real thing.
Yeah. I mean, so we've gotten to the place now where we've invited the person to have a conversation and they've agreed, let's say. Now what? What language can we use? Let's pick a scenario talking about perhaps what they want their, again, for lack of a better word, like their death plan to be. So do they want to be cremated? Do they want to be buried? Have you thought about where that might be?
Do they have a plot?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because at least in the Hispanic community, like I think if I ask my mom that question, she'll like, you know, go break out some rosary or something and try to like, you know, she's like saying I'm going to jinx her, you know. It's like, you know, trying to have that conversation, and because I want to know, I want to execute on your wishes. I don't want to be thinking about these things. I don't want to be the one that has to make these decisions on your behalf. I just want to be able to execute on whatever you wanted. So I could really use some help, specifically me, Iván. I could use some help from Maria to sort of have this conversation, you know, during the holidays, perhaps, or some other time. So help me out.
So you already touched upon something really important. This is all of the historical knowledge that we hold. You don't know exactly what your mom will say when you have this conversation, but you joked, and that was only a half joke. Your mom's going to bust out a rosary, and she's going to begin praying because you jinxed her. Within that joke, you're tapping into the very important historical knowledge of your family. This is all part of the pre-planning. What's going to be relevant in conversations around death? Is it religious concerns? Is it cultural concerns? What are the traditions? And remember that you're thinking about your audience, the parents, not yours, not what you want for yourself. Maybe you've carried on very much the same religion or culture, but if you've taken a couple of steps in your own direction, that's cool for you. Make sure you know which framework you're using when you have that conversation. If you're planning on having a conversation with a religious mother and she's going to have that rosary, talk about it from planning what type of religious pieces should be part of her funeral. Mom, have you thought about the church? That's not going to be the most important part of the estate planning, but that's the door.
Yeah, at least we can start from there, right? If she's comfortable having that conversation, because the likelihood is she's thought about that at some level, right? So, yeah. I mean, by the way, I'm definitely sending her this podcast just to listen to. So this is whatever I say here, I'm just gonna say, hey, listen, this is as me giving it to you, so that you can. Let's just pretend this is our conversation, and I'm just gonna send it to her. To talk about avoidance behavior.
Really, I wasn't gonna say it.
But I think that's a good, the more we have this conversation, it's becoming more obvious to me that, you really want to dial in on the perspective of whatever's going to land the best and then taking that approach. Again, it's not about me. It's about however the recipient receives the information, not about the messenger and what makes us feel most comfortable, right? So whatever gets us to move is not going to be the same thing that gets, her to move or somebody else to move.
Exactly. What gets you to move is not necessarily going to be the same thing that gets your mom to move. And Iván, do not assume that you're the one who should have this conversation with your mom. Perhaps.
Yeah.
I would bet, I don't know your whole family, but I would bet you're the one very well versed in it. I don't know if that means that you're the best messenger for it. Perhaps, but don't assume. Have a conversation with other folks and decide who delivers this message.
Well, I might have to hire you, Maria, the conversation.
I'm ready.
Awesome. Yeah, it's just and any particular, any particular time of year or where would you start with that particular conversation? On the death planning, for example, like how do you ask the questions of, I've been thinking about, what are your plans? Like, I don't even know where to really begin with that. Like, what's my opening line? I need like the step-by-step.
Sure. Okay. Well, let's back up just a moment. What time of year? It's never a great time to talk about death, but it is such a serious topic that you don't want it to be folded into the busyness of the rest of life. So if your parents are serial hosters and are having lots of Hanukkah and New Year's and Christmas parties, this isn't the time. They're very busy. Okay. Okay. But then how to actually say, so when you die, what's next? That's very callous. You're not going to do that. How about, I'm trying to think of something that's kind of universal. I'm usually much more explicit in one particular family, but universally. Mom, Dad, I hate to think about death, but I hate to think even more about what happens with an unplanned, unmanaged after-death time. And then look how I just held the silence. No one likes it, but that's what you need to do. You make a statement and then you let it sit. You can't know what to say next until you get their response. Do they lean in? Do they deflect? If they deflect, turn their head, change the subject, make a joke, that's not the right time to pursue it. Without their buy-in, the conversation isn't going to go well. Now, let's say they do buy in. That's when you want these open-ended questions. Have you thought about? What would you like? How would you like to direct? Because that's a real volley of reassuring that they have control.
Yeah. Because ultimately that's what it is, right? I mean, you really do. I think that's a great place to start because then you're giving the power back to them, right? And ultimately we're just trying to execute on some of these things so that, we don't have to determine when we are in a vulnerable state once something happens and then having to think that we're making the wrong decision, right? And I know you and I have talked about, like, for some folks, the fear of maybe the tarnishment of legacy around what we thought about that generation not doing that planning and how that impacts everyone else might get them to move that forward, right? Like, man, I really wish grandma and grandpa, had that conversation with us before because it was a challenge for us to really have to figure that out. And they didn't do a great job planning and we tried to have a conversation. And so that tarnishment of legacy would get me to move. I know for sure.
And it's common. That's so common.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think another motivator is considering, have your parents been working in some way to establish legacy, wealth, efforts put forth in their lived times? You can talk about not just the ease of execution, but ways to preserve what they've built.
Yep. You know, the open-ended questions and putting the control back in their hands. Have you thought of what would you, how would you like to direct us?
Mm-hmm.
What would you like to see happen?
What would you want? What would you want?
Right. Yeah. What would you want? I think that all of that flavor of conversation is probably, again, less threatening.
Yes.
And again, it gives the recipient all of the power back. And it's a great place to start, because I think once you start there and wherever they are at that moment with their decision, you can kind of take that down the financial route, the health route, the death planning route, the estate planning route. And it's, that makes a lot of sense.
I think it's helpful to have 2 estate planners to recommend, because again, it's all about control. It's not, you should call my guy. It's, these 2 places have come really highly recommended in the community. Maybe you want to be able to name who that's that has used that particular lawyer. Perhaps that's a question your parents want to know. They want to know who's the reference. But if you can say these are 2, that's like dropping the menus on the table and then taking a step back. You've reduced some of the burden of what do I do next without being overly prescriptive.
Yeah, no, and do you offer to be involved? Do you offer not to be involved? You just make the offer and the invitation, and then you back away.
You ask, what would be helpful if this is assuming that they have buy-in. You gather information. What would be helpful? I'm more than willing to go to this meeting or name another sibling who could, but we don't have to if that's not what you'd like. And again, say it, pause, hold the space. I have reiterated this a number of times because outside of the therapy world, it doesn't happen very often, and it's one of the most powerful ways to keep a conversation going, by pausing. The invitation sits in that space.
There it is.
Yeah.
Had to fill it.
I was going to say, who's going to break the pause?
Yes.
My dad is an expert at sitting in silence. I think he just doesn't have a lot to say, so he will just often just sit in silence, just totally comfortable. And like I've learned over the years to be okay with it, but like if you're not used to it, it's like, what are we doing here?
Exactly. But that's where you'll see how much buy-in do you have. This is on a continuum. It's usually not your parents are on board, they're pushing back. There's a continuum. There might be places where they're willing to open up and places that feel more personal. This is not a dichotomy. And so the space allows them to take another step forward because they need to step rather than being pulled.
And can you give the audience a few tips on how to deal with whatever emotions get evoked if the conversation doesn't go the best way you think, or maybe you don't like what they've decided on? Maybe you always thought that they would be buried in X, Y, and Z place, and they're like, no, dude, I want to be cremated and I want to be up on your mantle. I have whatever the decision is, right?
Yeah.
But if it doesn't go against, or if it goes against what you thought, ultimately it's the recipient's decision. But I could use some help on what if that conversation doesn't go the way you would like it to go.
Okay, for starters, it's not a conversation. This is going to be an ongoing dialogue. And that shift in framework is important because now let's say your parents have bought in and they gave you some feedback. You're surprised. Even with all this historical knowledge, you've known them for 45 years. You had a good guess at how it would go and you were actually wrong. Maybe a couple lanes to the left. You're not totally wrong, but you had no idea. Cremation is in their plan and you don't want to do that. It is an ongoing dialogue. So you've received information and you hold on to it. You go home, you sit with your thoughts, you talk it through with a friend, with a spouse, someone trusted, because you don't want to spill everyone else's private details. But you work through your own, or you call me up. You work through your own response to receiving the information. Then, so you don't want to edit your feelings out. You want to feel them. You want to think it through. Next comes the edit. What's my response? Why did this land for me? Why do I feel icky about it? Why do I have concern? Maybe you don't actually think your parents have made a good choice. Once you work it through and edit it, then it would be time, after not in the same conversation, after some real sifting through, then it would be time to go back and have another discussion with your parents. Perhaps you can see that they're making a questionable decision. You might realize within this, I've seen this happen, within this conversation, that your parents are not thinking in the way that they would have 3, 4, 5 years ago. It might be evident that your parents are experiencing some cognitive decline. If you need to go back and continue the conversation, that's okay. Gently, slowly, with questions, not declarations. I can't believe you want cremation. That's a horrible decision. Okay, that's just going to get you fired from the family. But you can go back and, after your feelings have simmered, ask questions.
Create the space between your emotions and then your response.
Exactly.
Give it some time.
Space matters a lot. Because this isn't, we're not in court. You're not expected to, nor should you have, an immediate rebuttal. There's always the chance that you go home, sift through, and the information your parents gave you now lands differently after it's marinated a couple days or a couple weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the distinction between conversation and sort of just a chat that you're just going to execute this whole thing, it's going to be perfect. The whole, we're going to lay it all out. We're all going to agree, high five, and everybody's going to go about their way. Is not a reality, right? It will be an ongoing dialogue. Because there are action steps that need to take place, and there's going to be multiple conversations along that way.
Yes,
it's a whole entire process, less a one-off chat.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I'm getting that sense. Yeah.
When I've thought about the revisions in these conversations, it's come up honestly around burials. And I had a family where they always imagined being buried where they were born. They were born abroad. And if the children in our generation executed that plan, that would mean that nearly no one could attend that burial and no one would visit that deceased parent, because you know where everyone lives? On the East Coast of the United States. When they revisited it gently with time, the parents, they just always assumed they would be buried where they were born. The parents realized, oh, okay, buried where my family lives now. And that's a big mindset shift, because for immigrants, the tie to the home, your land of birth, might be really important for any number of reasons, and it might really draw you back in death. It doesn't make it logistically feasible.
Yeah. Well, Maria, listen, this has been extremely valuable for me. I mean, I'm like, my mind's certainly racing. So I really appreciate you having the conversation and having you on. As we kind of wrap up, are there any particular things that we didn't talk about, or one particular thing that you want to make sure that the listening audience kind of takes away?
Okay, so I could probably keep going for 7 hours on conversations with parents. I think that it's actually to reiterate that that their motivation is not the same as your motivation almost ever, and that expertise does not equal the messenger. We absolutely addressed this. It was much earlier on, but that should be the final moment takeaway.
Awesome. Love it. Well, thank you so much. And Maria, if where can the audience find you if they have questions or could use your services? Where are they able to find you and get in touch? So I can have you link my website in the podcast. Of course, I came up with a very long web address, Maria Graceffa, psychotherapy.com. What a mouthful. At least nobody else took it. No, who would want it? Yeah, you definitely own that one. Perfect. Well, we'll make sure to tag you on it. And thank you so much for being on again as we kind of wrap up the year and these conversations are becoming more and more sort of front of mind. I certainly got a lot out of it, and I know the listening audience did too. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Ev, appreciate you, man, as always.
Of course, looking forward to hanging out for the holiday party.
Absolutely. And to you, the listening audience, thanks for tuning in. Please click subscribe below to be notified when we release our next episode. Thanks so much.